Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. This is Charlie Cicchetti, your host, and I'm joined by Davis Richardson. And one of my first questions is take us back to early in your career. And it's awesome because he's early in his career, but already accomplished so much. We're going to talk about the fact he's in grad school. He has a tiny home. He's written a book and kind of venturing into the next part of his sustainable career. So, Davis, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here, Charlie.
Let's talk about, I think you grew up in Georgia, then you moved a little bit west, and now you ended up in Texas. So talk about some of your schooling. Where did you get your undergrad? And can you tell us about how that worked?
Yeah, like you said, I grew up in Atlanta, grew up in Marietta, I've been kind of all over the place over the past 7 or 8 years here. I started my college career at the College of Charleston, actually, in South Carolina. I was studying historic preservation there. I was playing baseball there, and I ended up transferring after 3 semesters at Charleston to Harding University, which was a small liberal arts college in Arkansas. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but I loved it. I played baseball there. I had a good career. Studied interior design, which was great. And so I did that. I've always wanted to be pursuing a career as an architect, but I've been playing baseball my whole life. And so trying to find a place that I could both play and study design was really important. So that's what kind of led me to Harding. It was great. I really enjoyed my time there. I had an opportunity during one of the summers there to work out in Boulder, Colorado, with a firm called Caddis Architects, interning for them. They're a very small firm, but doing some really good design. They're really national leaders in what's known as co-housing. So got some great experience with them. And now I'm here in Austin, Texas, pursuing my Master's of Architecture degree at the University of Texas.
Man, that's awesome. Now you've been able to hit some cool cities too, Charleston, Boulder, and now Austin. So I got to ask, what position do you play?
I was a catcher. I'm 6'3". I'm a big guy, but it's funny. It happened because I think I was on my 8-year-old all-star team after rec ball, and that was before kid pitch. And so you put your worst player at catcher because they didn't really have to do anything. So I was the worst player on my all-star team. They put me at catcher, and then I took it way too seriously. So when we started kid pitch, I was ahead of everybody else, and just kind of stuck with it from there. I realized I wasn't really athletic enough to go back into the field. So I just stuck with it the rest of my career. And it took me away. So it was a lot of fun.
Wow, man, you must be a good ball player. So, I mean, you got some great colleges you're going to. You're pursuing your master's right now, a couple of years into that. But how did you first get into sustainability? I mean, has that been a part of life growing up, or did you have an aha moment during college? Where did that shift happen? Yeah,
so I think for me, I'm 25. I graduated high school in 2011. So once I got into college, the sustainable movement within design and architecture has been pretty much at the forefront. So it was kind of just preached to me from the beginning. I don't think I was ever really too hesitant about it. Yeah, I mean, I think it was a big part of my education as soon as I started. And I knew you could tell it was a trend within the building industry, so I just kind of accepted it. I don't think at that time I really knew how important sustainability was. I think, unfortunately, when I was that young, I don't think I understood a lot about science and climate change. I remember hearing about that. I went to a private school in high school, which was a wonderful place, but I was going to this big public university in a science class with hundreds of students in there and a professor talking about climate change and geology and all these things. And I was pretty skeptical of it at first. And then I realized, over time, I realized this isn't even a question. This isn't something I should even be skeptical about. And I realized the science is overwhelming on this. And this is a major issue that we have to deal with. And I realized that architecture has the opportunity to make a difference and make a big difference. And so that for me became something I became very passionate about within architecture. I think more so even than more so than just how it's kind of a trend within the field. It became something I was passionate about and felt like really provided meaning and depth to the field of architecture.
No, that's awesome. It sounds like someone had some influence on you. And anyone listening, remember, there's someone can just stop, have a conversation about sustainability or climate change, or who knows how it might affect their career path. So did you have any mentors? Do you have any mentors? I mean, anyone that's really helped you so far, or anyone you're really kind of following?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been very blessed with having some people who have invested a lot in me. So probably the first mentor I had in my career was based in Atlanta with Smith Dahlia Architects there in the Old Ward is Craig Wirtz. And he has been great. He was an athlete in college. We met, he had a mutual connection, and we met several years ago, probably 5 years ago now. And we just grabbed lunch. They never had a job at Smith Dahlia that they could offer me, but that was never really my goal. He just took an interest in me as an athlete and an architect. And so we've been, whenever I'm home, I try to make an effort to go see Craig. He's been great and very encouraging in my career. He helped me. I sent him my drawings when I was building tiny houses. I said, hey, can you mark these up? Like, I've drawn some details before, but I've never built anything. He was great with that. And he was very honest about it. Like, hey, you've got to figure this out. He didn't sugarcoat anything, which was great because I didn't need that. I didn't have the time for that. So he's been great. At Harding, I had one of the best professors I've ever had in my life, and the best teachers I've ever had in my life was Amy Cox, and she's one of the directors of the interior design program. And I had her for pretty much a class at least every single year of my career there. And she was very encouraging of my wanting to pursue architecture. I think that I when I was studying interior design there, I struggled with, or at least I had a tendency to be looking too far ahead and looking towards, well, I want to be an architect and not an interior designer. And she pushed back against that in an appropriate way. I mean, she never discouraged me from thinking about architecture and wanting to pursue architecture, but she made me think about design from an interior standpoint and really thinking about people and how they interact with space, and thinking about, being more empathetic and just putting yourself in the shoes of other people in general, but even within your spaces. And that's been a huge part of really what I value and what I believe now. And so she did that in such an effective way where she didn't try to stymie my passion for architecture, but she really challenged me to think about that. So both Craig and Amy have been good mentors for me. Working at Corgan this past summer in Dallas, Corey Gear and Chuck Armstrong. Chuck is the design director and FAIA with Corgan. They were both great. I mean, fantastic people to work with, and still people I keep in touch with now as I'm going forward with my school.
Any advice for those listening, Davis, on how to maybe get a mentor? I mean, do you reach out, cold call, cold email, find them at a networking event, or even just follow what they do? It's one of those where I think some might be intimidated. It's like, I'd like to sit down with someone.
I think in today's day and age with social media, I think it's a lot easier. I think the big thing about a mentor is I kind of got lucky with those. I mean, Amy was obviously my professor. Chuck and Corey were guys I was working for. But with Craig, I mean, that was just a mutual connection that we had. I don't even really remember how that happened, but I mean, you can't be afraid to ask. You have to know that what you're asking for someone's time without a whole lot in return. So, I mean, if you have something to offer to people, I mean, not necessarily like I'll work for you, but if you can provide value to people, I mean, I think they're going to be a lot more receptive to being in the mentor. But I mean, I think a lot of people within our field want to give back. I mean, they want to share their wisdom. And I think as long as you're open and understand that and are cognizant of the time that you're taking, but are, understand that they have something to offer you and that maybe you have something to offer to them, that mentorships are a great, I think it's not that hard to find. What I will say is with social media, I mean, it's really easy to connect with people now, not necessarily on the same kind of personal scale that maybe you did at networking events and things like that. But it's very easy to at least have a superficial relationship with somebody. And so for me, I think that that's a really good way of reaching out to people in your community is finding that, people in the design community tend to be pretty involved on things like Instagram, which are very visual. And I think not being afraid to, in a sense, kind of be annoying about it. I mean, like their photos, comment on them, send them, don't flood their inbox, but, DM them once in a while, reach out and make that kind of personal connection. And then once you started to establish just a casual, like, hey, I like what you're doing relationship, then when it's time that maybe you need to call on something, you're not, this random person just asking for a favor. If you seem like you're invested in what they're doing and in their work, genuinely interested in what they're doing, they're going to be a lot more receptive to that. So I think that's kind of
great advice. You got to be genuine, especially on social media there. So great advice. You've had some awesome mentors so far. Let's talk about so far in your career. We were talking earlier about affordable housing and even tiny homes as maybe one approach towards that. So why such a passion towards affordable housing? That seems like something you're really interested in.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, I really am passionate about the way that architecture affects people. I'm an architecture student, so I'm totally interested in some of the architecture stuff that's going on in the world. And I love exploring that and doing some of this digital fabrication stuff and just really pushing the envelope. That stuff's really fascinating to me. But at the end of the day, what I really believe is that architecture is about people. And when I look at some of our biggest social issues, really up there, and I think that they're very connected to each other, are, of course, sustainability, which is what we're here talking about, and also affordable housing. I think that we have a crisis. Like you mentioned earlier, I've gotten to live in some very millennial cities with Boulder and Austin now, and then I've seen the impact that a lack of affordable housing is having on these communities. And I think it's very much a people issue. I mean, I think that we've got to be able to house people affordably. I think that's a fundamental human right, is to be able to afford your shelter. And a lot of people in this country right now can't do that. And so what I'm really interested in is this has typically been a policy and urban planning, a political type of issue. And architects, I think, have often stayed towards the Guggenheims and the Pradas of the world. And that stuff's great. But what I want to see, what I've tried to explore is, why does high design have to be exclusive to people who have a lot of money to pay for it? Architects are some of the most creative people out there. And I think that just from a business standpoint, I think that we have an opportunity to figure out how we can bring really great design and make money off of it by giving it to people who typically haven't had it. And it's going to take creative ways of thinking about funding and thinking about how do I actually make money off of this, because it may not be from the direct user of the space. But I think there's a possibility there. So that's what I'm really interested in. To that end, when I was moving to Austin, I was trying to find an affordable place to live. I didn't know anything about the city or where I really even wanted to live. And so instead of buying an apartment, I ended up building a tiny house. And we built it in 9 weeks over the summer between graduating from partying and then moving to Austin. It was very quick. It was stressful. It was a lot of work and it was a lot of fun. But yeah, so I mean, that was kind of my foot in the door. And as I got here and was living amongst other tiny houses and kind of seeing what the community in Austin was like, it only further. And as I was learning stuff in school and reading more about affordable housing and the issues that we're facing, it really piqued my interest.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I'm looking at, and we're going to put the link in the show notes, but just a picture of the tiny house. I mean, 9 weeks, and you've got a tankless water heater, a composting toilet, one window unit for maybe those hot summers in Austin. But just what surprised you about designing and building that tiny house, and maybe what has it done for your footprint? I'm sure you've had to shrink down some belongings even as a college student. So yeah, maybe you didn't have a lot to have to pare down, but with the tiny house, kind of what surprised you about that process? And some listening are probably wondering, where do you park something like that?
Yeah, that's been an interesting process. So one of the things I learned, as this is going to sound so dumb, but it was really kind of out of necessity that I even did it in the first place. I really wasn't an apologist for tiny houses, and it wasn't something that I was this hadn't been a dream for years to build one. It was more like, A, I need a place to live, and B, I want to build something over the summer. So let's build a tiny house because I can build it here in Atlanta at my parents' house and then drive it out to Texas. So that's kind of why I did it. Nice. The one of the things I learned, though, is it was going to be such a quick turnaround that I just kind of had to go boom, boom, boom and just get to work. And I didn't stop and think about this sounds so dumb, but I didn't think building your house is going to be a lot of work. I started building it and we got a few weeks in. And, you're waking up, spending 12, 14 hours a day on this thing. And the next morning when your alarm goes off, you're like, I do not want to get up.
Do it again. Yeah.
Building this house again. But I couldn't take a day off. I didn't have enough time. So thankfully, I mean, being an athlete, it taught me that work ethic, and there are a lot of times alarms were going off at 4 a.m. for workouts, and I didn't want to get up, but I knew I had to because the alternative was far worse than getting out of bed. The same deal, like the alternative of being lazy and not working that day was you're not going to have a house. So you stay pretty motivated when that goes on. So that was kind of the one thing I wasn't even thinking about when I set out to do it. But no, I mean, I've learned a lot about paring down. Like you said, it really wasn't that difficult as a college student. But one of the big issues I've run into is where to park it. I think when I built it, or when I was designing it, I kind of had this vision of like, I'll find this cool, old bungalow on the east side of town, and they'll have, got deep lots here in Austin. So, you'll park it in the backyard. There's all these beautiful live oaks. It'll be shaded. You'll have this kind of like, maybe you build a patio for your landlord out there and get months rent free or, something like that. That's kind of like the dream, right? And what it ended up being is they're not actually, at least in Austin and in most places, they're not actually legal in a backyard like that. I mean, they're considered RVs, and you're not supposed to live in those in single family neighborhoods. So where you end up being either like in an RV park or in there are these tiny house communities, which is where I started. But I mean, it was a glorified RV park. It was basically an RV park for tiny houses. It's a gravel lot with some hookups, and out in the middle of, out in the boonies, 30 minutes from town, and it's blazing hot because there's no shade, and this is Texas. And so, yeah, I mean, it wasn't exactly what the vision was, and that's been one of the biggest challenges. And actually, one of the things I talk about in the book is as much as I love my house, and if I could go back and do it over again, I totally would. I do see a limited shelf life here for tiny houses, and I don't want to lose. Basically, what the book's about is I don't want it to be another trend. I don't want it to be just a design trend that we saw on Pinterest for a few years and then it disappears. Like it's done some really good things, and I think the demand for it and just the fact that it's been on these shows on HGTV and things, I think that's telling us something that people are looking for, and we need as designers to take some lessons out of that and move forward with them so that we don't miss an opportunity to be building greener, to be building more affordably. And I think that there are design opportunities as well that we can maximize.
No, you're right. And it has to be sustainable from a lifestyle standpoint, right? Why don't most diets stick? Is they're a little too extreme, and you have to make sure it's something you can live with for a long time. So, yeah, the book, Going Tiny, Failure plus Opportunity in the Future of Affordable Housing. So Davis just launched that here in March 2018. Super excited for you to have that book out there. It's on Amazon. We'll put the link in the show notes. But, one more thing about just tiny homes. I mean, why now? You're right. We don't want this to be a fad. Here in Atlanta, where I'm based, they have a lot of tiny home festivals where, you can show up and you can end up buying one there on the spot. I mean, how do we make sure this sticks from someone that's designed, built, and lived in a tiny home?
Well, I think the real obstacle right now is the trailer. I mean, it sounds, that's really what makes these things what they are. And I think that's what appeals to a lot of people is the kind of nomadic lifestyle that you can have with a tiny house. But it's really not that simple as far as like, moving a tiny house is really not as easy as like, oh, well, you know what? I want to drive to Denver today. Like, it's just not that easy. And so I think that's really what's running into a lot of issues is that the trailer, instead of being on a foundation, you have structural issues. You have, it's a vehicle instead of a house. There's just, how do you insure it? There's just a lot of things that go into it when you throw a house on a trailer. And so I think what we've got to learn is that I think the reason why it's happening now is I think that people, we're almost 10 years removed now, but the housing crash in 2008, I think a lot of people, especially people in my generation, people my age, who were kind of in their formative years when the crash happened, I think that we're very skeptical of putting our money in a 30-year mortgage. I think we're very skeptical of putting our money in a stock market we don't really understand. And so I think that what the tiny houses are offering is a perceived alternative to that. And I say perceived because it is an alternative to the traditional 30-year mortgage. But I think in the long run, it's going to create a lot of problems as well if they're not addressed. And so I think what we can learn from it, though, is people want to downsize. People don't, we're not in the same era as we were maybe in the early 2000s where people want bigger and bigger and bigger houses, these awful McMansions that keep spreading out in the suburbs. I mean, people want to be in the city now. People are flocking back to cities. They want to live smaller. They want to live more sustainably. They want to live more minimally, not just from a footprint standpoint, but I think that people are seeing higher levels of anxiety and depression in society. And I think people are realizing that the kind of materialistic culture that they may have grown up around has fostered a lot of those things. And so I think that they're searching for that. They're kind of searching for the one-size-fits-all solution to all those things, from feeling like you're doing your part from a green standpoint and dealing with maybe mental health issues and dealing with economic things where you feel like you may not ever be able to afford that 30-year mortgage, and wanting to live in a city. When you look at all those issues, the tiny house really makes a lot of sense. But I think we need to assess moving forward how we can accomplish those things in something that's not on a trailer.
No, that's a great perspective. I hadn't thought about that. Just that perceived freedom compared to the housing crisis. Well, what's keeping you busy right now? I mean, you're obviously in grad school. You've got the book out. You're entrepreneurial, but you're thinking, okay, career moves. What's my next move? So what's kind of keeping you busy right now? Any exciting projects there at UT? And what do you think's next for you?
Yeah, so you've mentioned the book. So that was kind of the latest thing that I was really trying to get pushed out. So that's good. I'm waiting to see how that does. That kind of just got crossed off the list. So the next thing, I actually I've been on a 3-person team here at UT for HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development puts on a design competition every year called their Innovation in Affordable Housing. The team I was on here at UT was named one of 4 national finalists. So we are headed to D.C. here in a few weeks at the time of the recording. When this comes out, we might actually be in D.C. when this gets released. But so we're headed to D.C. to kind of we'll refine our scheme here over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll head to DC and present to a jury and present in front of HUD. So that's been really cool. I'm really happy with how this project's coming along. So that'll be exciting. There's 4 finalists. So it's us, Colorado, Denver, University of Maryland, and the Pratt Institute. So we're all over the board, both geographically and from a design standpoint. Those schools are all so different. So I'm really excited to see just how, what everybody's come up with and see where that goes. So that's going to be a lot of fun. Other than that, I'm applying for residency right now. So hopefully doing a 6-month internship here starting this summer. So we'll see where that leads.
Good luck. No, that's exciting, man. And good luck on the competition. And DC will be fun. You've accomplished a lot. I'm impressed by you a lot, Davis. So what do you think so far in your career, your life is kind of your specialty? Like, what are you best at?
I think, we've touched on this. I think I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I totally do have, I think, a voice and experience with affordable housing. But I don't want to limit myself to that. Like I said, I'm still interested in a lot of things within the world of architecture and how architecture can make the lives of people better. And that extends beyond affordable housing. I think, it's hard for me to say exactly what my gift is or what I'm doing well. But I will say, I think what I've been taught from being an athlete my whole life is just the value of work ethic, obviously, the value of collaboration and working as a team, but also a kind of mindset. As an athlete, I think one of the biggest things, and this comes from a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, which really changed the way I saw a lot of things. But basically, there are 2 types of people where you're either a fixed mindset and you're focused on results, or you have what she calls a growth mindset and you're focused on the process and innovation. She doesn't really use that word, but innovating and progressing and always getting better and never settling. And that's very much an important mindset as an athlete, which I think really helped me to be successful in my time as a baseball player, but also it extends to the way I view design. And I'm really obsessed with innovation and why is it that things are the way that they are? For example, with affordable housing, why is it that we have to pay 30-year mortgages to own a home? Are there other ways that we can do that? Maybe not. There's good reason these things are established, but I think that's really what my gift is regardless of the typology, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's, a big public, civic arts center or something like that. It doesn't really matter. I think for me, what I have, because I don't have a lot of experience, because I don't have 20 years under my belt doing this one building typology and say, I've perfected this. What I do have at this stage of my career is is an almost naivete and an optimism of, like things have been done this way for a while. Yeah, but we're doing this because we've always been doing it this way is never a good reason to do something. So I think I have the kind of mindset to always push the envelope and try to say, is there a better way forward for a changing world?
It's great. When I worked at Opus Corporation, the motto was a better way. And you gotta continue to innovate. You kind of answered one of my next questions. A good book, Mindset, fantastic book. Any other books you'd recommend to those listening?
Yeah, so I've been reading a lot, especially this year. I've been making more time for it, and I'll recommend. I could recite a list, but two that have been really good for me. Other than mine, I'll plug mine. You should go read my book, but it's. I don't think that's really going to change your life the way that these two have been really impactful for me. But Evicted by Matthew Desmond was I think Obama put out a list last year in his last year in office of like his best books of the year, and this one was on it.
Okay.
It's about affordable housing, but it's basically taking telling the story of what it's like to be very low income in an American city, and what the cycle of poverty is like, and how difficult it is to break it. And it's like really kind of depressing in a lot of ways. It's funny. I mean, some of the stories he tells are really entertaining, but I mean, it's so eye opening of like what it's like to really live with perpetual poverty, and just kind of shows you like it's not just laziness that causes that kind of thing. So that one's really good. It's a great read. And then I just finished this book by Richard Florida called The New Urban Crisis. And he's the co-founder of City Lab over at the Atlantic. And he basically is breaking down a lot of issues with affordable housing and what we're facing in our cities here. I think he just released it this past year. So it's very current with our current social and political climates and all that, and the relevance of all those things. But it's very good, and he breaks it down. He breaks down our issues in a way that are really easy to understand, and then basically presents like, I think it's 7 things at the end. Like, these are the 7 things that we really have to do going forward to make a difference. So those Evicted and The New Urban Crisis, I would definitely recommend.
Thank you. No, those are great. I've read Mindset, but not the other two. I'm gonna check them out, and we'll definitely link to your book too. Just a couple more questions here. You're a fascinating guy, Davis. Let's talk about bucket list. The first time one of my business coaches told me about it, I was like, Tim, don't you think I'm too young for a bucket list? And you're not. And I've got a big bucket list. So you've accomplished a lot already, but what are 1 or 2 things on your bucket list?
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny you say that, because I'm also pretty young. Definitely don't feel as young as I did when I was playing ball. I feel like an old man now, but I know I'm not. And so bucket list isn't something I really have thought about a whole lot to this point. I think if I had had to give something, it probably would have been, build a house for myself or write a book, which are, thankfully 2 things I've accomplished already, which is pretty cool. But I think at this point, I don't really have any desire to go skydiving. That scares the crap out of me. I think if there was one thing I had to say, I think it would be really cool to like throw the first pitch out on opening day or at the All-Star game or at the World Series or something. Like, not being a ball player anymore, I don't really miss it too much, but there are definitely times I'm itching to get back out on the field. So I think realistically, like, the one thing I would love to do is like get to throw out the first pitch at a really important Braves game or something like that.
That's awesome. And I like that. That's a unique one. Thanks for sharing. How about some career advice? Some listening might be just now starting off in this green building movement, or maybe they're making a career pivot, jumping in. You're passionate about sustainability, affordable housing, tiny homes, and who knows what this next chapter of your career is going to be. But any advice you wish you'd have had earlier?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I've touched on a lot of the things that I really believe about as far as, innovating and all those types of things. But I think one of the things that thankfully I caught on to fairly early, but I probably wish I'd known a little bit earlier in my academic career. I mean, even in my professional career was to really go after what you're passionate about and tailor, especially from your academic standpoint, tailor your education to what you're interested in. I mean, at least in academics, they hand you a program of work and say, these are all the classes you need to take, and this is when you need to take them if you want to graduate on time. And that's all well and good. That's really helpful. And obviously you have requirements you have to meet, but you have an opportunity, especially, with either, whether it's a big school or, these same types of things can obviously apply within your career or at bigger companies, really take advantage of the resources. And if it's school, it's electives and things like that, to really pursue what you're interested in learning about. And I think for me, I knew when I was studying interior design that I really wanted to pursue architecture. So a lot of my projects, because we had a small faculty there, they were flexible. They worked with me. They let me kind of tailor my projects more towards an architectural portfolio to get into grad school. Here at UT, I've been, trying to leverage, the resources and connections that we have here, whether it's, we have a robotic arm downstairs and trying to use, get in with the people who are working on that to do some interesting stuff, or, using my resource, my professors to connect with people with the city of Austin and some, sustainable urbanism projects I've got in mind. And, how can I get that in front of the right eyes? So I think all that to say, like, whatever you're passionate about, you have whether it's in your career or your academics, you probably have the ability to pursue it. And even if nobody's telling you, here's how you do that, I think just trying to find a way to make your own way. It's almost kind of an entrepreneurial spirit. And just because you have an entrepreneurial spirit doesn't mean you have to start your own business. You can do that as a student, and you can do that by working at a company. And I think that those things go a long way to your professors, to your superiors at your job, and show them that, like, you're really invested in what you're doing. And it'll, from a career standpoint, that'll definitely help you stand out. But I think you have a chance to be a lot more fulfilled too by what you're doing, rather than, I know academically, I hear a lot of people complain about, this class and that class, or this is the schedule. And I've always been one to be like, well, then do something about it. Like, study what you want to study. Like, don't just complain without offering any better way forward.
No, that's great advice, man. You're going to continue to be successful, whatever you do next. I know there's some architects listening that will probably reach out to you and just want to chat, or who knows, there might be an opportunity too at certain firms. But and good luck on finishing up at grad school and getting some time there. It sounds like you're enjoying Austin, and just really want to say thanks for being on the podcast. I know you've inspired some listening. We're going to post a link to a write-up about the tiny home, a link over to the book, and just some ways you can get in touch with Davis through his website, which is a great-looking website, by the way. So,
thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Davis, just want to say thanks, man. Thanks for being on the Green Building Matters podcast. Anything I can do to help, I will. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode, and you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast, tell your colleagues, and if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.